It's no secret that the 2013 video game Aliens Colonial Marines is not so great of a game. It released in a state that was full of glitches and nowhere near as fleshed out and polished as the gameplay trailers were teasing. Now, it wouldn't be as memorable as it was if it was just another bad or mediocre game, but thanks to a whole bunch of behind the scenes problems both before the release and after the release of the game, and everything had become public, a very different story was painted that led to the disappointing game making a lot more sense for it being that way. Today, I wanted to talk about these issues, as the game has had so much controversy around it, from misappropriating funds, cancellation of the project, an extremely long development cycle, heavy outsourcing, mismanagement, and embarrassment thanks to a shocking revelation that would come out about half a decade after the release of the game. And now the game sits prominently on lists of what some may claim as one of the worst games of all time. So let's dig into what all happened here with Aliens Colonial Marines.
Welcome back to the 25 Days of Fringe Miss, where there's going to be
Wait. Double Fringe Miss. Aw, you only thought you were gonna get 25 videos this year? Look at you. You look silly. But I'm here to fix that because I'm going to give you not only 25 videos, but I'm giving you 50 videos. I have 2 channels. That's 2 Fringe Misses. Each day there'll be a brand new video on both channels for 25 days. I haven't slept in months. Enjoy the content. Or don't. June 1st, 2011, developer Gearbox Software and publisher Sega would tease the world of their upcoming project, only offering a small look into the game in relation to the second Alien film, Aliens, and a brief description of where to expect the story to take place. But it wasn't until E3 2012 that we got a more in-depth look into the gameplay of the game, and what it fully looks like graphically. The first impressions were pretty well received. The game had that horror-esque atmosphere, the camaraderie of the Marines themselves, and an impressive level of the computer's AI for how the xenomorphs will be trying to come after you. At this point in time, Gearbox had mostly goodwill in the gaming space. The success of Borderlands and all the hype of the about-to-release Borderlands 2 post-E3 in 2012 put the studio in a really good spot, and it seemed like they would be getting to have their hands in some really cool and hopefully large projects. Their only real setback at the time was how Duke Nukem Forever was perceived by fans and critics after a decade of waiting for this game to be real, and how Gearbox was going to be the hero in the situation for making it a reality. With the state of that game's final product, it was a mixed bag where people would leave their blame. Some saw it as the fault of Gearbox, just making a poorly reviewed game that didn't live up to a lot of people's desires for it, but a lot of the blame seemed to be shifted to the crazy history of the up and down development of the game that went on for so long, and then when Gearbox got their hands on it, they just did what they could and the sole blame couldn't be theirs. Plus, with Borderlands 2 on the horizon, things for the studio were going to be okay, and then more deals would show that they would have more beyond the now Borderlands franchise for fans to get excited about. But with having the studio have a face to the company, someone who would deliver his own blend of personality and constant promises, leading to years later being in their own level of controversy starting to build up the problems Gearbox would truly have. Aliens Colonial Marines would be a much more documented tale of so many problems coming to light, and eventually on February 12th, 2013, the game that would be released would not be the one that was teased and promised. But what truly went wrong here is how a game's development got so messy behind the scenes, and the final product did not look or play like it was shown off or advertised, as well as the story having conflicting points of continuity against the film it was set to be a full canon sequel to. Right before release, the official critical reviews would hit, and they were brutal. Across the board, scores were low, and then the masses got to get their hands on it. The gameplay wasn't anything more than your standard first-person shooter title. The graphics were way less as impressive as the demos was, and the xenomorphs themselves turned into a comically bad, non-threatening glitch fest that left everyone pretty dumbfounded. The fallout of this led to the stories of the troubled development coming to light, whistleblowers describing their experience of what happened, and the negligence and deception that played a role in a tumultuous relationship between the developer and the studio. But everyone, all parties involved in making the game a reality, have a role to play in the downfall of the game. The blame can easily be shifted around, but ultimately the whole project was a giant mess from the beginning.
Aliens Colonial Marines. Rated M for mature.
Before the 2011 teaser of the game, Sega had actually announced that this game was in the works all the way back in 2007, which, despite being hopeful that the game wasn't as far off as it was, still is bad business practice in the case of things going wrong, so promises and the overall hype wouldn't backfire in their face, and very quickly it already was. Gearbox was juggling a little too much at the time, either that or they really didn't care about one project more so than the other. Before the first Borderlands game was coming, the stories that would come out depicted Gearbox as taking development developers from Aliens and putting them onto Borderlands to aid in getting that product done, which was a big deal for that game having a last-minute overhaul of the graphics. As more people would be taken off the project and brought over to Borderlands, the Aliens game was slowly turning into a snail's pace of a development speed. In 2008, Sega learned about something fishy happening with the development of the Aliens project, as apparently Gearbox wasn't being truthful or honest to Sega about the size of their development team, which at this point was way smaller than they were told, and allegedly Gearbox was taking the checks from them as if the team was larger and if the project was hitting the milestones needed along the way. There was a brief moment where Sega then canceled the game, or at least they tried to. If they were paying all this money to only have it relocated to aid other projects like Borderlands and Duke Nukem with no real movement on their investment with Aliens, then it's better to start cutting their losses now and start figuring out what's happening. Gearbox would go through a harsh round of layoffs because of this, but somehow the project would prevail. But then the real questions that arose were, who the heck was even making the game? Sega would initially deny that there was a significant amount of outsourcing and that Gearbox was the studio developing it, but with so many accounts of the people who worked on the game plus the accredited studios who quote-unquote helped, it shows that Gearbox themselves took focus on the multiplayer aspect of the game, while something like the campaign was mainly done by the studio Timegate, while 2 other studios would aid in helping design the multiplayer. As more details would come out, it seems that Gearbox would constantly rework assignments with Sega to still work on Aliens to keep the project alive, as the goalpost of development would be moved every time. As Gearbox would find success in the first Borderlands game, more time would go into Borderlands 2, and even before that, just trying to get Duke Nukem Forever out. And during their final push to agree to get the game finished and out, a lot of that time led to prepping Borderlands 2 for release. Borderlands 2 is no small game, so it's easy to see how much focus went into that, while Aliens was still treated as a back burner game. Once Borderlands 2 was out of the way, the focus went back to Aliens for a quick turnaround time at this point. But the game was in a really bad state. The work that Timegate had done only made matters worse, and there was a fear that this game is extremely far away from being ready, and those working on the game believed that there would be another delay based on the state of the game currently, expecting to have more development time beyond the release date of early 2013. But Gearbox knew they couldn't let this game go any longer. The tensions between Sega and Gearbox were bordering on getting litigious. Developers over at Timegate would also defer the blame back to Gearbox based on how things turned out, claiming to only be following instructions to a T from Gearbox supervision. A lot of these details have been extremely documented since it all broke, with some things getting confirmed by gaming journalists and their collaborating sources. But when the largest players in this, like Gearbox and Sega, obviously not digging into it, there's probably so much more to it all that we'll never know.
This double fringe miss is brought to you by GamerSups.
What's the deal with GamerSups? I mean, it's less than a calorie, it has no sugar, but it tastes great. Something's gotta give. But there is nothing to give. Scratch that. There is something to give. How do you like 10% off your order of GamerSups? Use code FRINGE and do it now. Please, it helps the channel. Do you want to do cool stuff next year? Do you want to make 2024 cool? You support GamerSups, you support me, and we're gonna do big things. Link in the description. Use code FRINGE. 10% off. Do it. This all led into what the game was on launch. The game just wasn't finished. The certification part of everything was rushed and the game would be shipped out as it is. What the game was actually like compared to the trailers or gameplay demos was a massive disappointment. One of the most notable things that should have been exciting but didn't work out was the AI used for the xenomorphs in the game. They made this a major point to list when speaking about the game before launch, but upon release, they were nearly broken. Most often, they just weren't coming after you in scary ways or were just fodder for you to shoot down. And even sometimes they wouldn't at all. Instead, they'd be glitching into areas or glitching out of areas and not utilizing the vents that they were supposed to crawl through. It just wasn't anything like it was promised to be. Then the lawsuit happened. 2 months after the game's release, a lawsuit was filed against both Sega and Gearbox by a couple of players that stated what the companies had done was false advertising. Gearbox wanted out of the lawsuit though, claiming that they had to pay tens of millions of their own, saying that this was their way in helping complete the game to make it happen, but they would also claim that they were only contracted to develop the game. They're not in charge of the marketing for it, that's Sega's job. But it's easy to put blame on Gearbox, as the thanks of that would go to the CEO, Randy Pitchford, for being in the spotlight, as he would be the one presenting the game, its gameplay demo, and being a face that people could cast blame on. Gearbox is just trying to save Gearbox as a whole right now, and Randy would continue to defend himself and Gearbox, claiming that there was no embezzlement of money meant for Aliens on Borderlands, and that they did want to make a good game. There was no lack of care or misconduct coming coming from the work that they were doing on the game. I think that there are a lot of signs, whistleblowers, journalists, and details that paint a more realistic and less corporate recounting of the details that happen to give you the bigger picture here. And we can sit here and look through court documents and point fingers, but ultimately, I think the funniest part about all of this could have been avoided a bit better if it weren't for one singular typo that affected one of the heaviest marketing tools there was for it. One singular letter ruined what could have made this bad game just a bit better. I don't think it would have saved the game completely to be highly enjoyed based on every other factor we've talked about and what the game offers, plus adding on all of the behind the scenes drama, but if the xenomorphs at least worked, that initial promise of advanced AI would have been cool to see. In October of 2017, James Dickerson, a modder who was messing around with Aliens Colonial Marines, discovered something interesting. Within the code for the AI system for the xenomorphs to truly hunt you down and feel way more threatening overall was a problem that jumped out to James. This is the code here, but we're specifically focusing on that last little bit of these two lines. Attach Xeno to tether and attach pawn to tether. Wait, you see the problem? By deleting the A to fix the word tether, it would fix the issue of the xenomorph knowing how to handle the environment that it is in and where the player themselves are, being able to pull off a more complicated level of combat and make the game more intense and difficult when dealing with the xenomorphs. The game would no longer feel like a horde of glitchy xenomorphs for you to shoot and move on. One letter ruined an AI system that was a major part of the advertising, and aided in making the finished product such a disappointment. Maybe a lot of the more critical views, the lawsuit, and much more wouldn't have happened if the game wasn't as rushed as it was in the last minute, and the game may have been perceived just a tad bit better. It wouldn't have fixed everything with the game, but it really would have benefited from it being done right. Aliens Colonial Marines was so much more of a disaster than it needed to be. So many things could have been avoided. A better relationship between Sega and Gearbox, better management from Gearbox, and a better and more focused development cycle are what stood in the way of something being better than what we received. But regardless, here we are a decade later, and at least a way to mod the game for the better. Have you ever played Aliens Colonial Marines? Were you duped into getting it for the alleged false advertising? I know that I was excited for the game, both in it being in the Alien franchise, and I'm a huge fan of that, plus my love for Borderlands gave me some faith in Gearbox to deliver here. And so much so that I got the collector's edition. At least the figure from that is pretty cool. Either way, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I've been Jordan Fringe. Thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Later.